Yes, hello. My name is Professor Tom Haidu, and I'd like to welcome you to our final event as part of the Art of the Possible Festival here at the University of Adelaide. This is a discussion about the Open Music Initiative, which is a relatively new open source platform for music delivery. But before we do that, I'd like to acknowledge that we live on Garner land, and we respect the Garner people's culture. We respect their leaders past and present and future. It's my great pleasure to connect with Thomas Adorno from MIT. And George, how are you? It's nice to see you from Berklee College of Music in Boston, and Nick Faulkner from the University of Adelaide. So I think what we'll do is have a little conversation / presentation. And if we could start off, maybe Thomas, if you could maybe start off and maybe describe to us, what is the Open Music Initiative?
Sure. So it's an joint effort led by Berklee College of Music, Berkeley, and then some folks at MIT, to try to rethink the digital music business of the future. So with new technology coming in, what are the deficiencies of the current music work supply chains? What's holding up payments for artists, musicians? Are new technologies such as streaming, good or bad? Is there alternative ways? Could we enable individuals to stream themselves, right? So these are the sort of technology / human questions that we're trying to answer in this OMI, and with the goal of developing new business model, new standards, technical standards for the future digital music.
Great. So what's different? The patronage model essentially has dominated most creative forms for centuries, right? So how is this different?
What we want to do is empower individual artists and musicians, because what's happened with this technological revolution is that a lot of forms of work that used to be stable have become a gig type of work. So now we have truly the gig economy, like typified by Uber drivers. But in reality, musicians and artists, they've been gig workers for far longer than Uber drivers, right? And so how do we actually use technology to help gig workers get a better form of livelihood, a sustainable form of livelihood, particularly for artists and musicians, doing the thing that they love, which is being creative. So this is how do we help individuals in this way?
George, you want to jump in on this, because I know it's a philosophical passion of yours.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I mean, Thomas summed it up beautifully. Look, I mean, I think that the fundamental problem of what we think of when we say the record industry, and really there's at least two record industries, and we typically only talk about, or when people hear the word record industry, they think typically of kind of major labels and Spotify or whatever, and that's hugely irrelevant to, I'd say, probably 99.999% of musicians. So we have to think much more broadly about what art is. Thomas is right that it's been this sort of patronage system from the beginning, and it probably always will be. The problem has been that there's been tremendous amount of opacity around the transactions between the people creating the art and the people consuming it. And we're standing on this precipice of Web3, and actually kind of it's here, right? It's not imagined. And the thing that strikes me about it is that we have a chance now to do what Tim Berners-Lee wanted to do with Web 1, importantly, and by that I mean make it a bottoms up type of approach rather than Web 2, which is Facebook, et cetera. That was very top down. And then importantly, and this is dominantly my mission with respect to my life, but certainly all mine too, musicians, for whatever reason, tend to be late adopters with respect to technology. And because it's weird, and because of that, they abdicate, right? And so they abdicate the building of the tools to people who either by design, default, good action, bad action, don't have the musician's interest at heart. And so that's really typified by Web 2, right? So when you have a landscape of technology that's been built by pejoratively kind of white tech bros on behalf of musicians, that's not good patronage. That's bad. So the mission, to my mind, of OMI and Berklee and teaching and everything else is to demystify not only the technology around the transactions, but also to demystify the contracts, the education, the publishing. And the exciting element for me is that we're on this eve, and I give Thomas so much of the credit, but what he and I, dominantly along with many others, did with Radar is to which is an OMI project, to kind of create an inline learning tool, right? And by that I mean, rather than having students or others kind of be taught about the music business and then hope to apply it, which doesn't work. It's like trying to teach somebody to ride a bicycle through a book. It doesn't work. We can now do it inline, so that as a student or creator is uploading a work, there's an opportunity for them to take something that's been really intangible and abstract, and work through it and understand it. And again, I don't know how long this is or how many times I'll be able to make the point, but I want to make it one more time. The goal and the key is that musicians, artists of all stripes, cannot abdicate the building of the tools. They have to lean in, or else you kind of get what you deserve. And that doesn't mean you have to be both a coder and a guitar player. It just means you need to be aware and be part of the conversation in the process. And I personally, I don't love that this is an all male panel. I don't know if anyone other than me on this call is a musician, but I'm kind of done with having conversations about music business, music technology, etc., without artists in the room. I think that's what's led us here, to be honest.
Hey, Nick, jump in here.
Yeah, if I could jump in. I mean, the patronage model, it has led to so much what I'm going to call latency of taste, because things change, but in order to actually be picked up by people who are actually running those patronages, it had to change in a way that they could agree it was a worthwhile change. I mean, you've just got to look at things like Whistler's Peacock Room, if we go outside of music and we go back to art, which is one of the most beautiful things ever built, and the person he built it for stiffed him on the cash, paid him in pounds instead of guineas. And that it's absolutely ludicrous that somebody gets that level of control over what is that glorious aspect of creation. My background is a part creative, part tech, and I couldn't agree more with the way that people have not engaged with the tech part, and they've abdicated that responsibility, and they've ended up with a set of tools that are eating them. And that's the biggest problem. It's not even a matter of these tools aren't necessarily doing the job well. They're literally, in some cases, consuming the creatives. And people sit there and go, well, hang on, a leopard's eating my face, but I guess that's just the price of the business. And the idea that we can get more people engaged through education, through interaction, we can get the creative inputs going into the process of creation of the tools, as well as being managed within the tools. All of those wonderful things that happen when we go into disciplinary. Those barriers are just getting in the way of producing the kind of tools that are going to work for people and are literally not going to eat their faces. Because for me, the future is small scale creative with still all the other parts of the system in place. We're still going to have the large scale things, but in terms of people who want to do something with their stuff, they get to choose how to do it. And they even get to define the mechanisms through which it happens. That's where we break out of monoculture. That's where we start heading into transcultural aspects, being able to deal with people's music, which is sacred, which is only supposed to be heard by a certain group of people. So I just wanted to jump on those points.
Oh, that's great.
Literally couldn't agree more.
No, that's great. I want to zoom in and then zoom way out. But just to zoom in a bit, George, you were talking about two industries. I'm assuming you're referring to, let's say, the big major labels and the independent labels, right? I'm assuming.
No, it's sort of, I mean, it's the major labels and everyone else.
Okay, that's what I meant.
And,
So it's better said.
but it's sort of the unlabeled and by design or by default, and it's hugely irrelevant. Like it's all theater, right? And so that's a big part of it too. There's the labels have convinced artists that they can't succeed without them being the kind of gatekeepers for this. And of course, the odds are far worse for you of succeeding. So, you know, it's ludicrous, right? But at the beginning of all my semesters, I asked my students in an intro, like a big survey intro to music business class, I say, well, how many of you all think that you need a record label to succeed, right? Or major label, whatever, and no hands go up. And I say, well, how many of you all think that if a major label offered you a contract, it would be fair? No hands go up. I say, if Jimmy Iovine walked into this classroom right now and offered you a major label contract, be honest, how many of you would sign it? 85, 90% of the hands go up. And that's because it's about validation. It's about the theater, and the labels know that. And to Nick's point, unless and until we kind of strip away some of those things through practical reasons, this is a losing battle. I just launched a project called The Song That Owns Itself, and it's there's a white paper out there that's online, and we've launched one. It's a decentralized DAO-based song that is tokenized, and rather than assuming that royalty structures and profit participation should be based upon structures that are 100 years, I mean, so outdated it's comical. We're trying to redesign again from bottoms up. Well, what does the song want? Well, the song wants to be heard. Does the song want to be heard by the most amount of people? Not necessarily. Like, we have a really fucked up valuing of art where just because something gets heard or seen a lot, it's inherently valuable. I don't want to hear Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima, 10 times a day or 10 times a year. But when I do hear it, it means a lot. Do managers justify 20% of the artist's gross income? I don't know. If they're helping the song gets what it wants. Do labels justify 80 to 90% of the income? I can tell you prima facie no. Do publicists, do music supervisors? Like, how do we redefine this economy? What about gaming? What about collisions into all sorts of, like, we have to expand the total addressable market and stop talking about fucking major labels. Like, it's just I don't even know what it is. It's not even a red herring. It's just nonsense.
Well, and thank you, George, for saying that. And I do want to circle back to how do we ultimately find consensus.
Is this just us, or is there an audience?
No, there's an audience on Facebook. We're streaming from Zoom to Facebook.
You should not be on Facebook. Like, you guys should quit Facebook.
Okay,
but
we're
not today, not right now at this moment, but after this.
We're not
George, just fewer F words, George. You can do F words with me when we're whiteboarding, but
Yeah.
I can do them whenever I want.
Okay, so Thomas, I think this would be a good time to maybe show some slides and kind of pull back. What do you think?
Sure, yeah, high level view here, and let me just try to share. Can you guys see that? So yep. I'm gonna skip forward here with the painful slide, what I call the pain, which is just the numerous challenges faced today by artists and musicians. So we know about streaming. I mean, fewer and fewer people are buying discs, CDs. I mean, nobody does CDs. Practically. Touring, for musicians is physically exhausting. I mean, you can't do this for a living. I mean, you might do 6 months per year for 5 years straight if you're in your early 20s, but it's not sustainable. Currently, the payout structures are in streaming is fairly complicated. I think you need to be a George with a law degree to understand what's happening there. And we all know streaming play counts are typically underreported, and consumers are, I think, bombarded with so much today in this attention economy that often good music is missed out. So overall, this is a very complex ecosystem just because it's been around for so long. It's evolved. It's got barnacles hanging from underneath it. It needs revision. And my focus on this slide is we seem to be lacking technical standards that can support new business models, like what George was saying. A song that owns itself, right, using the DAO technology. So how do we make that sort of mainstream and common, right? We need technical standards for that. I can go back and visit that. There's only 4 slides here. Tom,
Yeah.
we could go back and review. Now this diagram I stole from the DDEX specification, and the DDEX community attempted about 12 years ago to begin to digitize some of the workflow processes in the music work supply chain. And even they would admit it's complicated. There's so many things that are just artifacts of history. But this is the diagram, what I call the subway diagram. This is in one of the 2016 specifications. But George can correct me, but roughly between the artist musician all the way to the listener, there's at least 15 entities, if not more, that are in this supply chain, and at each stop value is subtracted away, right? This is why artists and musicians get so smaller revenue from their music. And so as I said before, how do we help artists and musicians through open music? So how do they publish digital metadata about their own music without and this is Radar. George mentioned Radar. So Radar is the starts of a standard, and we've got code to help young musicians, like such as students at Berklee, to get into the practice of capturing music metadata. Meaning who are the players, when was it recorded, who was in the room, all these details that make up the metadata. And the goal is to be able to have one singular authoritative metadata about every musical work, because currently I believe all the labels have their own sort of database, and often it's incomplete. That there's duplication of incomplete records. We'd like to simplify licensing, digital licensing, and help artists and musicians do self-management. They need the tools, as George was saying. They need to be involved in developing the tools for music licensing. Could we use decentralized technologies like blockchains and DLT, distributed ledger technologies, to automate royalties collection, automatic splits, right? Because if you have a band with 6 members and you have a percentage split, money, when it comes, it should just, it takes a split second, millisecond for, allocation to be done. Could we develop some standard legalese for some of these licenses that covers, 80% of the use cases? There's always going to be exceptions, and that's maybe the 20% of it. The overall goal is, fewer gateways that subtract value, from, the artists and musicians, really as the source of the creative, the generator of the creative power. And finally, next generation standards. So these are just some buckets I put in. Metadata about music, integration with digital identity, specification of the business logic. Could we somehow, instead of talk about smart contracts on blockchains, could we talk about just the logic itself? What does it look like? And in a way that you can implement it in different platforms, different smart contracts. Because what's also happening in the blockchain world is that particular platforms are trying to bring people on board and basically do market capture, just the way the social media platforms have done. And finally, portability. What does that mean? Could artists and musician be able to move, data, metadata, license data, and so on about their musical works? But that's kind of just 4 buckets that, there's probably more, of course, but I thought let's put that in because these are things that are, are problematic today.
I wanted to jump in on this because I love the diagram that looks like the London Underground. Do you mind heading back to that?
Yeah, it does look like the London Underground.
There's a point I wanted to make here, because I'm a little bit of a train guy. I know that's always one of those things you don't want to admit in public, but anything that makes cities move better and get stuff moving through complex areas is fascinating for me. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize is when you look at things like this, you think of them as fixed, because we're conditioned to think of particularly train lines and undergrounds as things that are infrastructure that won't change. And I think one of the things we're talking about here is how changes in infrastructure can not just benefit the individual creator, they can benefit everybody. But the example I want to give you is actually not in music, it's in the London Underground system. Now, you may know there's a thing called the Circle Line. It's the yellow one that was sitting inside the London Underground. The problem with the Circle Line is the moment you get a delay, you can't get rid of it. And what happens is, over the time that a Circle Line is running, if you get a delay, it cascades and it just gets worse and worse and worse. You can never get rid of it. So in fact, the London Circle Line is now more the London Spiral, because what they've done is they've actually used existing tracks and they've repurposed them so that instead of dealing with something that seemed like a good idea at the time, when they actually worked on it, they were dealing with all these problems. So they've made a structural change to this thing that you would never think about changing. I mean, the Circle Line is the Circle Line, but what they've done is they've made this structural change. So everybody who was already using it can continue to use it, but it works better. And I think that's one of the things that really struck me when I looked at this diagram, which is we've got a lot of people on here, including the existing publishers, the licensors. It's this swamp you've got to get through to get to people. But if I think of it from the publisher's perspective, that's what they see as well. It's not a clear path down to the creative. And when we talk about empowering creatives, what we're also talking about is making it easier for those relationships to form bidirectionally, to make it cleaner and easier, to make those legal agreements clearer from both sides of the equation. Now, I realize that people differ on how they want to get involved with the music, and there's that bias towards that. I need to have this in order to be successful. But I think it's really important to look at clarification of workflow as being of bidirectional benefit. I just wanted to make that point because I love this diagram.
Yeah, surely for this to be successful, we want everybody to win, right? So, George, let me push back on you. How do we create consensus and alignment from all the way from the very beginning, from the artist through to the majors as well, where everybody can benefit? How do you see that?
Everything that I've done in my career, I mean, I ran the first CD-only label, and then I started TuneCore, and then over the last whatever years I've been Mr. Blockchain guy or whatever, and every time they've been seen as these sort of existential threats to labels. My label had the first website, right? And every time the labels end up being the prime beneficiary of these advances, going all the way back to when piano rolls were pushed onto, it's a positive sum game if we want it to be. That's my hope with distributed ledger technology and DAOs. And I think I get what Nick's saying, but I worry too often that I definitely agree that with Nick about like, okay, so if we have this perception that because something exists, it's the way it has to be, and I think that's true, and people don't like change or whatever. But there's also this kind of Dunning-Kruger problem, right, where people who don't have a lot of experience within the music business come into it from outside and think they can solve it, and so they take kind of skeuomorphic modes of doing it and they do it wrong. But the best example I can give you is standards follow transactions, not the other way around. We continue to live in a world of transactions following standards, and by that I mean if you're building a campus housing or whatever, and you've got a quad, you don't pave it right away. You wait for people to walk across the grass and then pave over after they've walked. And so, yeah, Desirelines.
I just want to jump in because that's specifically an example that Nick has used in the past, literally. So you're mind melding here. Sorry, go ahead.
But that's awesome. The problem is that those non-desire lines, the lines done by kind of coercion, always accrue benefit to the incumbents and the stakeholders, right? That's capitalism 101. You know, if you are in power and able to make the systems and the metadata and the standards, you're going to make them in a way that benefits yourself, unless you can get into kind of a Web3 mindset, which is, sorry, Thomas, if I make something that benefits me and also benefits others, there's a reciprocal thing. That's what's going on with social tokens. So I don't know where people on this call, I'm sure Thomas is well ahead of me, but or listening or whatever, are with their heads and understanding of social tokens. But in my mind, and I'm old, this is the most significant marketing tool that artists have had to avail themselves of since I don't even know what, you know, maybe social media in the early days.
Why don't you
And
why don't you dig into that a little bit, George, just for background?
Well, so social tokens are byproducts of blockchain tech. And I've been saying forever that we would know blockchain had adopted once people stopped using the word blockchain, right? And that happened. Nobody talks about blockchain so much in the art world. Now they just talk about NFTs and social tokens. Sadly, most of them don't realize that no blockchain, no NFTs or social tokens, right? And so social tokens are a way for creatives of all types to both identify what I refer to as their most passionate percentile, that 1 to 5% of people who are aware of them that are net promoters, people who would love them and tell their friends. Social tokens choreograph alignment between the artist and that most passionate percentile, and create a marketing gesture where the people who love an artist and who talk about them naturally because it brings them joy can now be rewarded through that, and also the artist can see that it's happening, right? And so again, I go, and I think Thomas alluded to this, like Web 2, we are the product, right? Like everybody knows that. I don't know who said that, but we're the product, right? And we're just being moved around by our overlords, right? And with Web3, we can be both the product and in control of the marketing and the transactions. It's the last mile of disintermediation, right? Like that's what Thomas is going. There's all these intermediaries. The first era of disintermediation ended with Pro Tools, right? Where artists could say, well, I don't need a label to make a record because I can just make it myself. The second era of disintermediation ended with TuneCore and others, where artists said, well, I don't need a label to distribute my records anymore. And arguably social media helped with promotion, but transactions have been the holy grail. So with social tokens and NFTs, now we can disintermediate transactions. That's why DeFi is, you know, some of the most broken systems in the world are banks and the music industry. Both of them are leaning in, artists at least, to DeFi because it's so broken.
So let's dig into that a little bit about finding. Well, let's dig into it in the context, first of all, as let's take OMI as a sort of a platform and thinking about innovations above and below the line, so to speak, where we can then start to build out maybe another layer, another dimension to this train system that I'm looking at on the page.
You happy for me to jump in on this one?
Yeah, please.
I mean, obviously, I would very much welcome George and Thomas's thoughts, but one of the reasons that we got involved in this is the potential for stuff above and below the layer that is provided by OMI. Because underneath, of course, you've got the whole nation, you've got databases, you've got the distributed ledger technology. And of course, there's so much movement in distributed ledger at the moment with the changes being made with the shutdown of some of the server farms, the changes in Ethereum, the explosion of NFTs and everything that's going on. So there's a lot of space sitting underneath the OMI where we can look at alternative technologies coming in, being developed. And that's something that sits on the tech side, because in terms of a service layer provision into the OMI, keeping track of things, doing database stuff, that's got more of a tech focus. But what's really exciting for me is the application space that sits on top of it. You know, and of course, Radar is one of those. We have a working Radar node, which is currently running on the in a very small, select, secure environment while we just go through some stuff inside the campus. But that's already running. So thank you very much for providing the GitHub and all that. It's been an interesting process. But it's the other applications that come in. It's the person who doesn't want to have to learn tech as well as guitar, or computing as well as guitar, who wants to be able to set things up. And it's the people who can provide things in that space that are going to be good tools for the community. I put a note in the chat, which is that tools written from outside a community can never be authentic. And I've spent a lot of time working in computing. And I've watched people produce tools that don't work for computing people because they're a different type of computing people. And I've written systems for doctors. And, the biggest success we've ever had was where we provided a system to support the teachers of Australia in implementing a new digital technologies curriculum. It's professional development, online learning, and all sorts of stuff like that. The incredible thing that we did, our project lead went out, asked people what they wanted, and then provided it. That's the reason that project was a multi-million-dollar success, because it was working out what people in a different discipline area wanted, and then making sure that the technical results that were provided met those requirements in a way that would work for them. And so when I look at these spaces, I look at the interaction between creative community and technical community. So even when I start to look at the databases sitting underneath, do we want to have things that are culturally sensitive, culturally aware databases? Do we want to have things that are located? Do we want to have things that only do proof of stake because we don't want to actually contribute to waste energy or things like that? So, there are three distinct layers for me, and it's where we go in the application space, how we bring the creative and technical aspects together in that application space that I think is going to be an explosive area of growth.
George, why don't you jump in here?
Yeah, Tom, well, first off, Nick said it beautifully, I think. I'm sure Thomas could weigh in with much more authority than I in terms of the different layers. But yeah, I agree heartily about the application layer. I believe innovation comes from the margin and from the marginalized, right? And so one of the great tragedies of this era is that the actual creators who were marginalized, whether it's hip hop was, I don't need to go through the drill, but disco, punk, all of it, everything that has informed our culture was created by the marginalized and then appropriated by the non-marginalized, right? Like you don't need a history lesson, but this type of technology, one of the things that's so important to me about it is that it will create a ledger of authorship, right? Like no more will we be able to say, oh, Willie Dixon, he's just a janitor, like nope. and so that creates different incentives, right? Like your incentives to create and innovate are pretty low if you know that anything you create or it's just going to be taken from you, right? So there's a nexus between that kind of credit and authorship and innovation, and then the plurality of innovation. I mean, the reason I was sort of a jerk when I said I wish there were women on this call or more diversity on this call is because you can't innovate unless you get a plurality of opinions and thoughts. And to Nick's point about talk to your customer, and when Thomas and I were doing the radar thing, we thought, okay, well, we want to license works to filmmakers, right? Well, I'm not a filmmaker. So we went to a film school. We asked them what they were looking for. And I bet maybe you guys could, because you're all smarter than I am, but I don't think many people would get the answer to this question right. We asked, what is your most to filmmakers? What's the most important thing you need to be able to search for when you're searching for a song, right? And I didn't know, right? I had a thesis, but I was wrong. Does anybody know?
Oh, I'll take a guess.
Go, Tom.
It's just a random guess, though. Duration?
You get this right. It's gonna what?
Duration?
No.
Okay.
It's a good guess.
I was going to guess.
Now I can breathe easier. What? Nick?
I was going to guess length as well. So
No.
I'm out.
What is it? Tell us.
If it has vocals or not.
Wow.
Right. So think about it, but they don't care about the author. They don't care about the name of the song. They don't care about, it's all, you know, they need to know mood, right? That's what they want. We want to be able to search for like moods and you know, themes. So all the metadata that we were talking about for the music industry fails them completely fails them. And so why is there so much piracy in terms of getting music licensed into films right now? Because the process of it is like booking travel in 1973, right? It's like you gotta, or buying drugs or something, you gotta know a guy and have a phone book. So if you're a student and you have no budget and you have no way to, like, it's out of control. So there's a fundamental misalignment between the customer and their needs. And once we start thinking outside, and that's what I meant about point one of the current record industry, the current record industry is gonna be fine, guys, right? Like, we don't need to worry about them. They've got contracts till the end of time with the biggest catalog in the world, and with every DSP that comes online, more money is just gonna be fire hosed into them. They will be fine, right? But like thinking about what their systems need, and all that's gonna do is entrench it. So we've got to address the market, whether it's through film score, VR, you know, all those types of things, but then create systems where actual transactions can occur. And then you get sustainability, and then Spotify's never going to be a source of income for any artist, right? If you're an artist if you make $1 million a year from Spotify, right? That means you're probably making 30 or 40 to 100 million from other sources. It's not ever going to be a material source of income.
Hey, Thomas, jump in here on this above the line, below the line as well.
Sure. You know, yeah, I absolutely agree with Nick. You know, I guess my history, I mean, I grew up, you know, when, you know, the internet, TCP/IP was not yet final standard, right? It was this is the mid, you know, in 90s. And it was very clear that system design needed to be layered according to functionality. So, you know, bringing that to this model, you know, things such as George was saying, tokenizing rights or ownership rights that could go on top of, you know, on top of that. And George, you know, mentioned NFTs. You know, George and I have had discussions about, well, you know, why is it that we can't treat the artist himself or herself or themselves as an asset? This is a human being.
That's the song that owns itself. I mean,
yeah, this is a human being that's going to be given the right feeding and tender loving care. It's going to be producing amazing music for the next 20 years. Well, why not, you know, put money into this plant and feed it and give it opportunity, you know, so that, you know, and so how could we automate that layer? That how can we let his or her or the family members invest tokens in this plant, this person, right? This, you know, and, you know, how can we say to ordinary people, like, hey, you know, just like, you know, when you have Patreon, hey, I want to throw $100 at this guy. I want to throw $1,000. I want to throw $100,000, and I want to do it with a click of a button, right? How do we do that? Kind of. So that's kind of, you know, more layers on top of what Nick was saying.
I like the idea. I mean, you mentioned Patreon, and of course, the Patreon structure, you've got an authority in there. You know, whenever we go back to that, we've re-centralized, we've worked out a way that we can pass some money through, and mysteriously, some of that money comes out, and then some of that money goes to you. And the idea that we could mesh that ultimately what happens is you go to a concert, you listen to some music, you move your social tokens around, the artist standing in front of you benefits directly. You know, maybe there is a tiny amount of overhead because some things do cost money, but that overhead is going into a space, and then that artist can then use that to build up, and maybe down the future there are record contracts or whatever it happens to be. But while they're trying to actually make money, they're not having to juggle CDs out of the boot of their car. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the old tapes coming out of the boot of the car and stuff like that with the hand-drawn stuff. It becomes a way that they could go to a festival and, you know, form an arrangement with the festival. Oh, you're going to show, so you're going to get this amount of gate receipts, and we're going to set this up as a smart contract with escrow. So you're guaranteed to get this. It's not a matter of, you know, we're going to move this around. It's a brand new way to make sure that things go where they should. And there's still a lot of possibility for people to choose to move how they do that into conventional spaces, semi-conventional spaces, or brand new spaces. But going back to George's point, and I think what we've been talking about the whole time, it leaves us open that if we see something new on the horizon, we can go towards it. And we can go towards it in a meaningful way and pay our bills and keep the lights on. And, you know, all of those things that, you know, everybody loves to do. And until, I mean, I think art is essential to life. You know, I'm a technologist, but I think that art and creativity and all of the things it comes from, there are those things that make life amazing. And for me, public health, education, and art and creativity, you know, you're feeding the mind, the body, and the soul. And until we get to the point that all of those are just funded for free, I know that's not going to happen anytime soon, then working out mechanisms where it can be fairly distributed and people who want to stay small can stay small and still make a living. I mean, this is the space that we're in. You know, right now, that recognition, this is what I did, this is what I created, this is what I would like to do with it. And if in the future I choose to do something different, you know what, that's up to me. I find it a really interesting time. It's one of the things I love about the OMI, that statement of immutable authorship.
Yeah, and we're in that time, right? And we're seeing that is where we are at now. So, I guess the question is, so it's really who said that? Timing is everything, right? George Burns. We're kind of in that time. So, who are the industry partners and potential partners that you all see going forward then? I know that there's a lot that we can't see because things are unfolding very quickly, but what's your vision, George, as to how this unfolds and grows?
Look, I think that one of the things that we've done really well, and I take 0% of the credit, is to aggregate a really good, diverse group of signatories, right? So we do have all the major labels, which is obviously why I don't take credit for that, and the major publishers and PROs, and that's important. And if I were them, I'd want to be in these rooms too, right? I mean, these are conversations that I think are beneficial, and it is important as much as I can come across as kind of burn it all down, and it's really not that. Major labels have their place, I suppose, and you know, I don't. So it's certainly a good idea to always kind of, you know who you're working with, or for, or whatever. But then I think more interesting to Thomas and to me, to myself, are the kind of adjacencies, like, so where, you know, Nick, you're talking about health.
Let's drill into that.
Well, Nick, you're talking about health, and so. I've worked for years with a company that uses music to treat Alzheimer's, and so they're OMI signatories, right? And so again, the whole purpose of Radar is to create a licensing platform where the people who are licensing the music in know that the values align too, right? Like, that's a big component of how we have to go forward. And so if you're, and I know because I've represented them legally, if you're a company trying to use music to treat Alzheimer's, what licenses do you need? You know, and so karaoke license, right? So they were getting all this pickup, and then they were starting to expand into senior living care centers, and the senior living care centers went, oh, well, we can't play music in here because they didn't have PRO licenses. Right? And they didn't want PRO licenses because they're expensive. And so I went to my friends at the PRO and said, you need to give these people a license. 2 years. They could not figure out what type of license it is. Right? Like, that's a failure of the system. And so with OMI, with Radar, I want those type of people, because they can go get shitty, library music anywhere. But to be able to come to someplace like Berklee, and you're going to get a certain threshold of quality, and also the values there. And on the other end of the side, the Berklee students, no Berklee students is going to be like, no, I'd rather not have my music used for, like, we have a music therapy program. So you get that kind of value alignment. And if I have my druthers, it's going to be a lot more of that. Collisions, right? To me, the biggest musical moment of COVID was Travis Scott on Fortnite. You mean
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
right? Patreon's not gonna do it. How Substack, like we can't, we're Patreon and Substacked out. How many can we have, right? So we have to, my friend Matt Dryhurst talks about guilds, and like, because if we're not careful, we're going to reinvent the exact same patronage system again. But if we do it again bottoms up in a guild-like system using crypto and social tokens, we can reorganize. So
Well,
I want more people that can have that type of conversation. And oh my, I welcome them from being orthogonal. Bring me twine makers. Bring me llama farmers. We will find a way to kind of build the ecosystem.
So we're really talking about, obviously creative entrepreneurship. Thomas, do you want to add anything to that? I was just gonna.
Sure. Yeah, just a little bit. We've MIT and Berkeley, we've been looking at this data-driven society, this notion of a data cooperative. So we're trying to understand. Well, remember the farmer co-ops, right? Farmers out middle of the United States, right? That they develop co-ops as a means to collaborate and share resources and pool resources. Could we have groups of artists and musicians in certain verticals or certain types of music get together to form this co-op, where, for example, they could share the cost of putting their metadata on a platform, right? Just the IT costs, share IT costs, right? And being together, they could share not just experiences and insight, but also data, real data. For example, performance data, gig data. When you performed in West Coast, East Coast, how many people showed up, and so on and so on. So that's kind of another project that we're looking at, is this just a data cooperative for artists and musicians.
Well. So let me key off of that, and maybe this is a good final lap for us in this conversation. Now that MIT and Berkeley have been working in this context of Open Music Initiative and data cooperatives, you now have another partner down in the Southern Hemisphere, and so let's think about the ways that we can expand that cooperative, could we just spitball some thoughts between hemispheres?
Let me check something.
I put a DAO together right now between us. I mean, we registered in Wyoming. We can. I mean, I wrote an operating agreement for Stowie, a song that owns itself. Like but if we could do that, like everything Thomas is saying, that's going to be the governing structure, because humans are flawed. We'll fuck it, so we've got to put this up on code. So yeah, you want to do something together? Let's get. It makes my heart burst that you've actually put a radar node together. Let's now market the hell out of it. Let's market with our values about why this thing exists and get some transactions going. Let's teach students about what social tokens and DAOs are. You're right, proof of stake is problematic with environmentally. Probably not forever. Is it work? So there's a lot of education around that too, particularly in the artist community, where they just hard no as soon as crypto comes up, and that concerns me. But I'm just excited. So excited.
I'm a Canadian who lived in New York and LA, so I'm all about free love, and let's just, although I'm living here in Adelaide, so let's do that. I just wanted, George, could you just talk a bit about your company in Australia?
Mood Agent.
Yeah.
So Mood Agent is a new. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to add that to the.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. So Mood Agent just launched, and I tell you, so it's a new competitor to Spotify. Obviously, we're trying to do it with a different set of values and everything else. It's in Copenhagen, founded there. And we've got, we're live in Berlin, Germany, obviously, India, and now Australia, and soon. And it's my favorite thing about working with the Australian team is just the absolute love, unvarnished, unironic, unarch of music and art. Like it's the best. I mean, I don't know why Australia isn't used more, and maybe it is, as a kind of test market for music stuff, because you don't have the land, and this is maybe a gap we can fill, right? You don't, like when I'm trying to launch a product in Germany, culturally and language wise, it's so asymmetric to the States, India, like, you know, but with Australia, I'm like, it's just this beautiful little microcosm with just a better attitude around innovation and things than over here. So Mood Agent's an example of that. We can certainly find some ways to interact, but you know, check it out. It's live in the Australia and New Zealand App Store. Tell me what you think. It ain't perfect, but I don't mean to give a commercial, but I'm genuinely interested. So
Great, thank you. So just to represent the truly Aussie side, Nick.
It's always really nice to hear people say nice things about Australia, but I'm actually I'm really keen to do the DAO. I mean, I've actually already sent mail to George. I'd done that before we started talking about the DAO because we were all in furious agreement. But I love the idea of doing that because I used to do some work around, you know, using data from the city and making that, understanding how people moved and flowed. And I worked with a lot of councils, and one of the mayors spoke to me and said, a lot of the stuff we're doing is going to make people happy, but it's really hard to measure. And when somebody comes to me and said, why do you spend $30 million doing that? And I go, well, it made people happy. One of the things about tracking music and being able to determine where it's being played, how it's being played, who owns it, what's going on, is that then makes it easier for us in many ways to then point out the value of music. Because let's face it, when people value it, there's more investment into schools and support, and there's more respect and there's stuff like that, because we know it's glorious, we know it's wonderful, but at the same time, if we can make it easier for an artist to say, this is my contribution and it's mine. And this is what happened because I wrote this song and I went to this festival and this is where I played it. You know, that's a powerful thing. That empowers people and that drives change. So well, I'm really keen to take those sorts of ideas, you know, the idea of how we look at music as a contribution, because we are already paying rights to play music in the business because we know the benefits of playing music, but we know the benefits. We haven't really evaluated them. So there's a lot of really cool stuff sitting in there, and anything that would allow 30 years ago me to keep playing the bad guitar in Rundle Mall and make a living out of it, rather than having to take up a serious job, I'm totally in favor of.
Well, there's a famous book, Thomas and George, you might not know this book, and Nick probably does. It's called The Tyranny of Distance by Jeffrey Blaney. And it's the story of Australia and how it's so far away. And I think in a sense, I think that narrative of the tyranny of distance is gone, right?
Yeah, in a metaverse.
Exactly. I mean, we're having this conversation, but I think this Open Music Initiative is an opportunity to really start working across hemispheres and develop this narrative. So, Thomas, I'll leave you with the last word of sage advice, if you don't mind.
No, I'm we're very happy to have this conversation and collaboration with Adelaide. I think I don't know how many of the audience know, for example, that Adelaide has the month-long Fringe Festival, which I believe is, correct me, Nick, is the second largest
in the world after Edinburgh.
After Edinburgh, right? So I was like, what? There's also the classical music event in Adelaide that's world class. So I think one of the things with Australians that they're so quiet.
UNESCO City of Music. It's also UNESCO
City of Music. Yeah. That Australians need to promote themselves more. I think that they tend to be quiet, like Nick here. So things like the Fringe could be used, for example, to experiment with things like the DAO and Radar and so on, because you have this sort of music community getting together in one location. But yeah, we're absolutely, glad to be collaborating with you guys in Adelaide.
Well, and we are so excited as well. Nick, any thoughts?
I was just going to say, look, it's really great to be working on these sorts of ideas. This is where the technology is supposed to be going. Using all these things to make people's lives better in a whole range of ways, to recognize what people have done, and we don't know where this is going to end up. That's the most exciting thing for me. 10 years from now, some of the people who start working on these projects today are going to create something that's going to blow all of our minds and we never saw coming. And that to me, that's where we need to be.
And I think on that note, that is the best note to end on. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, George, for taking the time. And thank you, Thomas. I'm sure we'll be chatting soon. And I get together again. Thank you all, and have a good
Great
day.
moderation too, man.
Thanks,
That was
Tom.
good stuff. Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
everyone.
Watching.
Okay.
Bye.
Ciao.
Take care. Okay. Bye.